While you waste precious hours of your life arguing with people who will never change their minds, someone else is quietly building the empire you only talk about. While you exhaust your mental energy trying to convince others of your worth, someone else is demonstrating theirs through results that speak louder than any words ever could. While you engage in endless debates that go nowhere, someone else is taking the actions that reshape reality itself. Tonight, we confront the most liberating truth about power. The strong do not argue, they act. In the grand theater of human interaction, there exists no greater waste of power than the compulsive need to be right in conversations, to win arguments with people whose opinions have no bearing on your success, to convince others of your value instead of demonstrating it through undeniable results. This argumentative impulse, this desperate need to be understood, validated and agreed with, is not strength, but its opposite, the weakness of those who seek permission from others to believe in their own capabilities. Tonight, we descend into the philosophical depths where words are revealed as the refuge of the powerless and action emerges as the language of true strength. We will explore why those who argue remain forever trapped in others' mental frameworks, while those who act create new realities that make arguments irrelevant. We will examine why the need to convince others is actually the need to convince yourself, why defending your position reveals uncertainty about its validity, and why the strongest position is the one that defends itself through results rather than rhetoric. Through the ruthless pragmatism of Niccolò Machiavelli, who understood that princes who waste time in council chambers lose kingdoms to those who act while others debate. Through the action psychology of Carl Jung, who revealed that authentic selfhood emerges through deeds rather than discussions about deeds. Through the will to power philosophy of Friedrich Nietzsche, who recognized that the Übermensch creates values through action rather than defending them through argument. Through the strategic wisdom of Sun Tzu, who knew that the supreme excellence consists of subduing the enemy without fighting by making resistance futile through superior positioning, and through the insights of those who have learned that power whispers while weakness shouts, we will uncover why your arguments are advertisements of your insecurity and why your actions are demonstrations of your strength. By the end of this philosophical transformation, you will understand why people respect what you do more than what you say, why arguing about your capabilities diminishes them while demonstrating them enhances them, and why learning to replace words with deeds is not anti-intellectual, but the ultimate expression of intelligence applied to reality creation rather than reality discussion. The question that will determine whether you remain trapped in the powerless world of endless argument or ascend to the powerful realm of decisive action is this: will you continue trying to convince others of your worth through words, or will you start proving your worth through actions that make words unnecessary? Niccolò Machiavelli stands as history's premier analyst of how power actually operates versus how people think it should operate, and his insights reveal that those who achieve and maintain real influence understand that results speak louder than rhetoric, that demonstration trumps discussion, and that the time spent arguing could be better spent acting to create the outcomes that make arguments irrelevant. Machiavelli observed that effective princes spend minimal time explaining their decisions and maximum time implementing them, understanding that power flows to those who shape reality rather than to those who debate what reality should be. The ruler who feels compelled to justify every action through argument reveals uncertainty about their authority, inviting challenge from those who sense weakness disguised as democratic deliberation. The political insight that Machiavelli provides is that argument implies equality between the arguing parties. It suggests that the other person's opinion matters enough to merit your time and energy in trying to change it. But true power operates through hierarchy, not equality. The strong do not argue with subordinates about decisions that have already been made. They communicate decisions and expect implementation. Consider how this dynamic operates in practice. The executive who argues with employees about company policy rather than simply implementing it creates the impression that policy is negotiable, that authority is uncertain, and that results are less important than consensus. This approach invites endless discussion that delays action and creates opportunities for opposition to organize and resist. The parent who argues with children about rules rather than enforcing them through consistent consequences teaches children that rules are debatable, that authority can be worn down through persistent opposition, and that compliance is optional rather than expected. This approach creates power struggles that drain energy from both parties while producing no positive outcomes. The individual who argues with critics about their capabilities rather than demonstrating them through achievement reveals insecurity about those capabilities while providing critics with attention and influence they haven't earned. This approach makes critics partners in defining your value rather than irrelevant observers of your success. Machiavelli understood that this argumentative approach to power stems from the misconception that others' opinions about your capabilities matter more than the reality of your capabilities. But power cares nothing for opinion. It responds only to demonstrated ability to create desired outcomes, regardless of what others think about the methods or the person employing them. The Machiavellian approach eliminates argument by making it irrelevant through superior positioning, better results, and strategic actions that create facts rather than engaging in discussions about possibilities. When your actions consistently produce outcomes that serve your objectives, others' arguments against your methods become meaningless because results provide their own justification. This approach transforms every potential argument into an opportunity for demonstration. Instead of defending your business strategy through discussion, you implement it and let the results speak for themselves. Instead of arguing about your leadership capabilities, you make decisions and accept responsibility for outcomes. Instead of debating your value in relationships, you provide value and let others draw their own conclusions. Machiavelli's wisdom reveals that those who attempt to draw you into arguments about your decisions, capabilities, or methods are often trying to delay your action while they position themselves to benefit from your hesitation. The competitor who engages you in lengthy discussions about market strategy is buying time to implement their own strategy while you remain trapped in analysis paralysis. The strategic principle that emerges from Machiavellian analysis is that arguing about power diminishes it, while exercising power demonstrates it. The moment you feel compelled to justify your authority, you have already begun to lose it. The moment you start defending your position through words, you reveal uncertainty about your ability to maintain it through deeds. Breaking free from the argument trap requires developing what Machiavelli would recognize as executive presence, the psychological state where you are so confident in your capabilities and committed to your objectives that others' opinions become irrelevant background noise rather than important validation to be sought or criticism to be countered. This presence manifests as the ability to make decisions based on your understanding of what serves your objectives, rather than on what others will think of those decisions, to implement plans based on strategic analysis rather than social consensus, and to measure success based on results achieved rather than approval received. Carl Jung's exploration of psychological integration reveals why the compulsion to argue often represents internal fragmentation, where the conscious mind seeks external validation for decisions that the unconscious mind doubts, creating a cycle where uncertainty breeds argumentativeness and argumentativeness reinforces uncertainty by making your position dependent on others' acceptance. Jung understood that individuals who have achieved psychological integration, who have unified their conscious intentions with their unconscious drives, naturally express themselves through action rather than argument, because their decisions emerge from internal coherence rather than external pressure. They don't need to convince others because they have already convinced themselves through careful consideration of their authentic desires and capabilities. The person who argues compulsively often does so because they are actually arguing with themselves, using others as sounding boards for internal debates they haven't resolved, seeking external validation for choices they aren't confident about, trying to convince others of things they aren't certain they believe themselves. This internal fragmentation creates what Jung would recognize as projection, the unconscious assignment of your own doubts to others, interpreting their questions or skepticism as obstacles to be overcome through argument, rather than information to be considered in your decision-making process. The result is endless debate that serves your psychological needs more than your practical objectives. Jung observed that action, in contrast, serves as a bridge between conscious intention and unconscious drive, creating integration through the alignment of inner desire with outer expression. When you act from integrated personality, your actions feel authentic and powerful because they express your complete self, rather than just the aspects of yourself that can be justified through rational argument. This integration eliminates the need for argument because it eliminates the internal uncertainty that makes external validation necessary. The person who knows what they want and why they want it doesn't need others to agree with their choices. They need only the strength to implement those choices, regardless of others' opinions about their wisdom or morality. The Jungian insight reveals that replacing argument with action serves as both expression of psychological health and method for developing it. Each time you choose decisive action over defensive argument, you reinforce the internal integration that makes such choices feel natural and powerful rather than forced or artificial. The person who masters this transition discovers that their actions become more effective because they are no longer constrained by the need to make choices that can be easily explained or defended to others. They can pursue complex strategies that serve their long-term objectives rather than simple approaches that are immediately comprehensible to critics and supporters alike. Jung understood that this action-oriented approach to life requires accepting what he called the loneliness of the individuated person, the recognition that authentic selfhood necessarily involves making choices that others may not understand or support, based on internal integration rather than external consensus. This loneliness is not pathological isolation, but the natural result of living from your authentic center rather than from others' expectations or approval. The person who can bear this loneliness gains access to the full range of their capabilities rather than limiting themselves to actions that others find comfortable or comprehensible. The psychological principle that emerges from Jungian analysis is that argument often represents the attempt to avoid the anxiety that comes with independent action by seeking consensus that makes individual responsibility feel shared rather than personal. But this consensus seeking actually increases anxiety by making your outcomes dependent on others' cooperation rather than your own capabilities. Friedrich Nietzsche approached the superiority of action over argument through his analysis of the will to power, revealing that those who possess genuine strength naturally express it through reality-shaping deeds rather than through attempts to convince others of their strength through verbal persuasion or logical demonstration. Nietzsche understood that argument implies what he would recognize as slave morality, the belief that truth is determined through consensus rather than through power, that validity comes from others' acceptance rather than from effective results, that strength must justify itself to weakness rather than simply expressing itself through superior outcomes. The Übermensch, in Nietzsche's vision, transcends the need for argument because they have moved beyond the moral categories that make argument necessary. They don't argue about good and evil because they create their own values through action. They don't debate about right and wrong because they measure rightness by results rather than by conformity to inherited moral systems. This transcendence of argumentative morality creates what Nietzsche called noble selfishness, the understanding that your highest obligation is to express your capabilities fully rather than to accommodate others' comfort with your self-expression. The noble person acts according to their understanding of what enhances life, rather than arguing about what others think life enhancement should look like. Nietzsche observed that the will to power manifests as the drive to overcome obstacles through direct action, rather than through attempts to convince obstacles to remove themselves. The person with strong will to power sees opposition as resistance to be overcome, rather than as opinions to be changed, challenges to be conquered, rather than as problems to be solved through discussion. This action-oriented approach to obstacles eliminates the energy waste that comes from trying to change others' minds instead of changing circumstances, from seeking agreement instead of creating results, from pursuing validation instead of pursuing objectives that matter, regardless of who validates them. The Nietzschean insight reveals that arguing often represents what he called ressentiment, the psychology of those who lack the power to create their preferred outcomes directly and therefore must attempt to influence those who do possess such power through moral argumentation, logical persuasion, or emotional manipulation. The person trapped in resentment argues because they cannot act, criticizes because they cannot create, debates because they cannot demonstrate. Their argumentiveness betrays their powerlessness while disguising it as intellectual engagement or moral concern. Breaking free from resentment requires developing what Nietzsche called creative power, the ability to bring your vision into reality through your own efforts rather than through convincing others to bring it into reality for you. This power eliminates the need for argument because it makes others' cooperation desirable rather than necessary, helpful rather than essential. The person who develops creative power learns to use others' arguments as information rather than as obstacles, as intelligence about their psychology rather than as problems to be solved through counter-argument. They can listen to criticism without feeling compelled to respond because their self-worth comes from their results rather than from others' opinions about those results. Nietzsche's path to strength requires what he called amor fati, love of fate, including the difficult fate of being misunderstood by those who cannot comprehend actions that emerge from strength rather than from weakness, from creativity rather than from conformity, from individual vision rather than from collective consensus. This love of fate includes accepting that your actions will often be criticized by those who lack the courage or capability to take similar actions, that your results will be questioned by those who cannot achieve similar results, and that your methods will be debated by those who prefer discussion to demonstration. The practical implications of understanding that strength expresses itself through action rather than argument extend into every area where you might be tempted to waste energy trying to convince others, instead of channeling that energy into creating the outcomes that make convincing unnecessary. In professional environments, replacing argument with action means focusing on results rather than recognition, on performance rather than politics, on creating value rather than debating about value. The professional who spends time arguing about their contributions instead of making contributions that speak for themselves reveals insecurity about their actual value, while providing ammunition to critics who can point to their argumentativeness as evidence of defensiveness. The action-oriented professional, in contrast, lets their work demonstrate their capabilities while maintaining strategic silence about their methods, motivations, and future plans. They understand that explaining their approach in advance gives competitors intelligence they can use, while demonstrating results after completion creates influence that competitors must acknowledge regardless of their opinions about the methods employed. In personal relationships, the principle means expressing your value through behavior rather than claiming your value through words, showing care through actions rather than declaring care through statements, demonstrating commitment through consistency rather than promising commitment through elaborate verbal pledges. The person who argues about their worthiness as a partner, friend, or family member reveals uncertainty about that worthiness while creating opportunities for others to question what should be self-evident through their behavior. The person who demonstrates their value consistently makes arguments about their worth unnecessary because their actions provide continuous evidence that speaks louder than any words could. In social contexts, strength through action means influencing conversations and group dynamics through strategic participation, rather than through attempts to dominate discussion, shaping social environments through your presence and choices, rather than through verbal assertions about how things should be different. The socially powerful person doesn't argue about social problems. They create solutions. They don't debate about what should be done. They do what needs to be done, and let others draw their own conclusions about the effectiveness of their approach. They don't try to convince others to adopt their values. They live their values so consistently that others naturally gravitate towards similar approaches or remove themselves from the social environment. The transformation from argument to action requires developing what could be called execution mindset, the psychological orientation that prioritizes implementation over discussion, results over rhetoric, and demonstration over debate as the primary methods for creating desired outcomes and influencing others' behavior. This mindset begins with the recognition that most arguments are actually procrastination disguised as engagement, ways of avoiding the uncertainty and effort that real action requires by remaining trapped in the safe world of theoretical discussion, where nothing actually changes, but much energy is expended in the illusion of productivity. Building execution mindset also requires developing tolerance for others' misunderstanding and criticism of your actions without feeling compelled to correct their misperceptions through argument. This tolerance comes from understanding that others' opinions about your actions matter far less than the results those actions produce, and that energy spent defending yourself is energy not spent advancing yourself. Perhaps most importantly, the transition requires accepting that action involves risk, that argument avoids, the risk of failure, of criticism, of being proven wrong through results rather than through logic. The person who cannot tolerate these risks will remain trapped in the safety of endless discussion that produces no real outcomes, but preserves the illusion of engagement without the vulnerability of commitment. The development of action orientation also requires what could be called strategic silence, the ability to pursue your objectives without announcing them, to implement your plans without explaining them, and to achieve your results without justifying them to those who lack the capability or commitment to achieve similar results themselves. This silence serves multiple strategic purposes. It prevents competitors from anticipating and countering your moves, it eliminates opportunities for others to discourage you through criticism or doubt, and it creates mystery that makes your eventual results more impressive because they were unexpected rather than predicted through prior discussion. The ultimate recognition is that the strong do not argue because they do not need to. Their actions speak with authority that words cannot match. Their results provide validation that opinions cannot diminish, and their capabilities create realities that make opposing arguments irrelevant rather than incorrect. The person who masters the transition from argument to action discovers that they become more influential because their influence operates through demonstration rather than persuasion, more respected because their respect is earned through achievement rather than claimed through rhetoric, and more powerful because their power rests on capability rather than on others' agreement with their positions. This mastery creates compound advantages because each successful action builds credibility that makes future actions more likely to succeed, while each avoided argument preserves energy that can be invested in further action, creating an upward spiral of increasing effectiveness and decreasing need for external validation. The choice that determines whether you remain trapped in the powerless world of endless debate or ascend to the powerful realm of decisive action is ultimately simple. Will you continue trying to convince others through words that have no power to change reality, or will you start changing reality through actions that make words unnecessary? Your strength is not demonstrated through your ability to win arguments, but through your ability to create outcomes that make arguments irrelevant. Your intelligence is not proven through your capacity for debate, but through your capability for execution. Your value is not established through your skill at self-promotion, but through your consistency in self-demonstration. Stop arguing about what you can do, and start doing it. Stop defending what you have done, and start building on it. Stop explaining what you will do, and start accomplishing it. Let your results speak for themselves because they speak louder, more clearly, and more convincingly than any argument ever could. The world is full of people who can argue brilliantly about solutions they will never implement, strategies they will never execute, and capabilities they will never demonstrate. The world needs people who implement imperfect solutions, execute flawed strategies, and demonstrate developing capabilities rather than discussing perfect approaches they lack the courage to attempt. Your actions create reality, while your arguments merely describe it. Your deeds shape the future, while your words only predict it. Your results prove your worth, while your rhetoric only claims it. The strong do not argue, they act. They do not debate. They decide. They do not discuss. They demonstrate. They create facts through force of will, rather than seeking agreement through force of argument. Choose action over argument. Choose demonstration over discussion. Choose results over rhetoric. Choose the path of strength that leads through doing, rather than the path of weakness that leads through debating about doing. Your power lies not in your ability to convince others, but in your ability to achieve outcomes that others cannot ignore, cannot deny, and cannot diminish through criticism, because results speak louder than any argument against them. The strong do not argue, they act. Begin acting now. Let your actions be your arguments, your results be your rhetoric, and your achievements be your advocacy for the capabilities you possess and the value you create. Stop arguing. Start acting. Join the ranks of those whose strength is demonstrated rather than declared, whose power is proven rather than proclaimed, whose influence flows from deeds rather than from words. The world belongs to those who act while others argue. Act now. Argue never. Your strength awaits your action. Your power demands your demonstration. Your influence requires your implementation. The strong do not argue. They act. Act now.